I know the polarizing topic of late last week was Billy Napier coming out, 24/7 Sports interview with them, those guys. Billy Napier kind of confirming that he's still going to be the play caller. And I don't think that has anything to do with the 6.5 win total that was thrown out there. I know many people want to make that connection, but I don't think so. But Napier calling plays. And well, let's take a look at it from both angles here. And I think the most popular side of this is Napier, the most popular side of Napier needing an OC for one reason or another. And I think there's some degrees to that thought. Some just think to take play calling off of his plate so he can be more of a CEO, a better game day manager. Some are fine with that. Some are mostly fine with the offense, the play calls, but not fans of the other stuff that seems to fall by the wayside. And there's another layer to that, and it's thinking that the offense is fine, but Napier doesn't have a great feel as a play caller. The flow of the offense isn't the best, that it's inconsistent, play calls in certain situations, not successful on third down, the middle 8, relying on 2 tight ends too much, not using wide receivers enough, relying on 2-man routes too much, when he is looking to throw the wide receivers. All those are aspects, of course, that we hear a whole lot of, just of the offense just not being there. And it's just not ran right with Billy Napier. The offense is good, just not ran by Billy Napier. So that's another layer to it. And then even further, some just plain hate this offense. They hate Napier calling the plays and just want something completely new. So now the other side of it, the offense has been good. I think there is truth in that. I think there's some good to this offense, but not great. Go back to year 1, Anthony Richardson at quarterback, inconsistent, but a very explosive offense. Year 2, you bring in Graham Mertz, have him play his best season of football as a quarterback. The offense is good, not great, not very explosive at all. Then, of course, year 3. We get here to year 3. That starts off as a disaster. Mertz gets hurt, opening the door for Lagway to play more, to eventually take over after another Mertz injury. We see the flashes of Lagway, but he's playing injured when he's on the field a majority of his starts. The offense tanks with Aiden Warner at quarterback. All the injuries lead to inconsistency at quarterback, but you can see the potential. So all these years were good, a good run game to lean on for the most part. Certainly not at the same level in year 1 where a lot of stats you see for the run game were borderline elite. But it's just been good the last couple of seasons as far as the run game goes. So, and taking all of this into account, the other side of the coin is Napier just kind of wanting to retain play calling duties and, keeping with the continuity with a young Lagway, being able to call the plays with a level of quarterback that he's never had the chance to develop until now. So I think at bare minimum, I think the offense takes a jump next season with a more seasoned Lagway just on its own. And I can see Napier thinking that he could be a big reason for that and why he wants to call plays. He believes in his offense. He said he feels like he gets the best feel for his team in that role. And I do feel like with Napier still calling plays that if the offense is going to reach its full potential, then Napier's going to have to adapt, do some things we haven't seen yet to open up this offense. Plays, and I think when I look at it, Will, the plays just kind of seem like they're on hard mode. Like they may work, but it just never really looks easy. It never seems easy unless it's that explosive play action pass down the field that even that gets predictable at times when it's going to be called. So can Billy Napier do that? Is there a way he can get more out of the offense where the margin for error isn't so thin? And I'm mainly talking pass game there. I like what Napier schemes up in the run game, but the passing game rarely blows me away at that same level. Not many open wide receivers that, I'm watching the national championship game and I tweeted it. Ohio State has got wide receivers wide open. I mean, they're just wide open. There ain't nobody near them. Notre Dame's a good defense. There's nobody around those receivers. I don't see that in this passing game. So can he adapt? Can he show some different things in this scheme? I'm all for the offensive continuity, but there is more to unlock with this dynamic quarterback you have, that he's got now more experience, being able to lean on him to open up the offense. Or is it just going to be the same thing we have seen? Lagway will make it better, but I think with Napier, there's a ceiling. So I've been on the go get an OC, more for helping out in the other areas, more so than I have the offense stinks. I do think Napier can lead a good offense, but I don't think overall that's going to be good enough. I think you have Lagway. It needs to be elite. I'm not sure the defense still takes the necessary steps to be where Florida needs it. So the offense may have to be elite to get where we all want this team and program to go. And I believe it's probably another play caller to get to that level. So I will say from Napier's eyes, I can see why he wants to do it. I have my guy. Let me see what I believe in can work with him. It would be hard for me to give that up as well if I'm Billy Napier. I will have my doubts, if it isn't good enough this time next year that he'd make a change then. But in that scenario, if you're honest with yourself, you gave it a shot, but you end up being the one holding the quarterback back and the offense back. Then with his last season, with Lagway's last season, that might be your last chance. Turn over the reins to a play caller. What I do think we are getting here is a clearer picture if Napier can be the play caller. Because with Lagway, to me, there's no excuse. If it doesn't work with Lagway, it's never going to work. So I think at this point, he's going to need to be honest with himself at that point. If we're looking at this a year from now, you have your guy, go do something with it. And I know many of you think you already have your answer and he won't take advantage of Lagway, but I do think at least we will get our full answer. I do think we will get to see it. I hope it doesn't cost Florida in the process.
That's awesome. Here.
Look, if I'm in his shoes, I'll probably do the same thing. And I don't chalk it up to arrogance, but maybe more ignorance.
I mean, I don't know that it's either one of those. So here's where I'll start. Schematically, Billy Napier's offense is fine. He runs a lot of the stuff that everybody else in the country runs. I don't think there's anything like groundbreaking about it, but I don't think there's anything that's flawed with it, right? I think if you have a quarterback and if you have the players who can execute it, then this offense is going to be just fine. But I think that's where the issue comes, right? Is that in order to win the SEC, even when you've got the most talented team, you have to get a little bit lucky. So like you think about Florida and the cock block back in 2006, had to get a little bit lucky. You think about the 2008 team, probably less lucky than the 2006 team, but still, like you look at any team this year, like Ohio State loses to Michigan and somehow sort of falls into the bracket. I mean, they wound up taking out everybody in the bracket because they fell out. But 2 years ago, you don't win the national championship that way. Certainly, they made the chase to Chip Kelly, and it kind of clicked by the time they got to the playoffs. But even like you think about like the Alabama teams with Terrence Cody early on and a block against Tennessee, or you think
Florida, you said Florida in 08, but you had to overcome an Ole Miss loss. You had a loss. So, it wasn't guaranteed back then if you had one loss that you were making the BCS title game.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess my point is that if you have a team that's even a really, really talented team, you almost always have to have some level of luck. Like, again, think about Georgia a couple of years ago where the ball's dropping and Ohio State kind of goes into a shell and pulls a field goal left. And that would have knocked Georgia out of the playoff. And then they go and I think destroy TCU the next week to win the national championship. So you need a little bit of luck. And I think especially when you're a team that's not as talented as everybody else, you're going to need a little bit of luck. And so what I think you want to do with any sort of program is you want to give yourself an edge everywhere, right? And it's either we build ourselves up step by step by finding an edge in every single thing that we're doing, and the collective value of those edges is something that puts us in every game, or it's death by paper cut, right? Where we lose an edge in each of these different areas. And all of a sudden now you're losing games that you shouldn't because the collective sum of those things where you haven't found an edge is actually hurting you. And that's my concern with him not having an offensive coordinator is, hey, is the special teams going to have everybody out on the team and have full focus? Is the game plan going to be exactly what it needs to be? Are we going to run out of the pistol 70% of the time? And have that sort of tendency where if you've got the running back behind there. Now, look, some of the explosives come from that, right? Because you run a play action and everybody's crashing because you have that tendency. But do you know when to take advantage of it? And then the other part is just, if Ohio State could have gotten a lot of offensive coordinators, but getting Chip Kelly is a major win. So that's the other part, is what's the upgrade, right? Can you find someone who's an upgrade in that particular space? Part of me admires Billy Napier for sticking to his guns. I wrote this in last year's preseason magazine, where
I remember this. So I was
it's like he's gonna live and die by himself. And in some capacity, I admire it. But in other capacities, I look at it and go, at some point, you have to change approaches. At some point, you got to decide when you're going to change. Now, we've already talked extensively tonight. He's got 2 years. As long as the wheels don't fall off, he's got 2 years. And so, I worry that you're wasting a year by not making the change now. But, again, it's sort of like, I was pretty vocal. I thought Florida should have made a change at coach this year. Especially early on with some of the returns that came, and you can argue with me, and I'd agree. I would understand the point you're making after seeing what happened the second half of the year. At the same time, I think both the people who go, you jumped the gun too early, and me going, I still have my doubts. I think both entities come in going, but we need to see something different. Right? Like, it can't be this. You can't run the same thing out there again, because you're going to go 7-5 again. Right? If you do the exact same thing and just say, well, DJ Lagway's going to solve everything.
Right. There you go. And that's my point. There has to be a realization that you were the one holding it back. Now, I can understand, like, you got that new toy, and you've been waiting for a quarterback like DJ Lagway ever since you started coaching, and you have that guy. I don't blame him for not wanting to coach that guy and coordinate the offense around that guy.
It's an interesting thing.
But if it doesn't work, you got to be able to realize it is time to turn the page before it's too late.
So if Billy Napier wins a national championship with DJ Lagway, does anyone care who the offensive coordinator is?
No.
You're talking about this like
that's part of everybody's argument here, though, is there's not many head coach OCs that are going to win a national championship.
Well, and no one is sitting there and saying, well, Ryan Day's national championship is cheapened because he's got Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator. I think the state of college football enabled Ohio State to hire a guy as the offensive coordinator who is extraordinarily qualified to be an offensive coordinator. But Florida could have done that last year. Florida could have gone and offered Chip Kelly a bigger deal than he got at Ohio State. And maybe Chip Kelly comes to Gainesville and all of a sudden we're having a different discussion. Again, that's an edge, right? Ryan Day decided he could get an edge by having Chip Kelly on his staff. I don't begrudge Kelly leaving the job he had at UCLA and going to take that job. He wants to coach football. He doesn't want to deal with the recruiting and the NIL and all that sort of stuff. There are other coaches who feel that way too. And so go get those guys, right? like bring those guys in. But
going to my one point about the can a head coach be an offensive coordinator and win a title? I don't think that automatically disqualifies you. Like, I think Steve Sarkisian in Texas's offense is as good as that is because of him.
Close.
but because of him, right? They're getting pretty close. They're in that spot because of him. When Lincoln Riley was dominating in Oklahoma, they were there because of him, not in spite of him. And so they were in that situation, to me, because of those guys in the first place. So I'm not willing to disqualify. Look, I agree. I think it is a lot harder to do it. But here's the thing. If you are a head coach that calls plays, you better be elite at it. Because that's what those guys are. They are elite at it. And they're still a little short of winning a title. Your Lincoln Riley and your Sarkisians. But they were there because of those guys. So I think it's a fine line there.
Well, let me ask you a question then, because the Lincoln Riley comparison is actually pretty good, right? So he had some unbelievable quarterbacks there at Oklahoma. And then he goes to USC and he's got Caleb Williams for 2 years. And he doesn't have a star at quarterback anymore. And his offense doesn't look that great. Right? Like, in some capacity, are we grading Lincoln Riley on a curve and going, he's a great offensive head coach because he happened to have elite quarterbacks for an extended period of time? And granted, he went through more than one over the course of that time, right? At the same time, Spencer Rattler had a great year and then fell apart the year after.
I'm going to give you a little bit of credit, too, for making Spencer Rattler actually look kind of good. So,
again, this is sort of where I go, is that 3 years ago, the narrative was Lincoln Riley is a great offensive coach and he can do it while he's the head coach. And now you look at him at USC and you go, if I was a Trojan fan, I'd be sitting there going, I'd be okay if you brought in an offensive coordinator or somebody to help. Like, that'd be okay. And has he been buttressed by having unbelievable quarterbacks? And, I think Klubnik being there on the Heisman list is hilarious from the standpoint of, he's been disappointing for a 5-star recruit at that position for Clemson. But I always talk about 5-star recruits being a 75% proposition to deliver. Dabo's hit on every guy he's brought in at quarterback. It's like he made a deal with the devil at some point and just bam, bam, bam. Taj Boyd, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, and now Klubnik and DJ Uiagalelei come in. And he hasn't hit on those guys. And we've seen what's happened to Clemson, and the Clemson offense has been sort of and it's come back to the pack. So I do see the point that, like, if I were in Napier's living room and he was talking to me about it, I'd completely understand the point that, look, an elite quarterback is where you get an elite offense. And, you can paper over holes. Like Dan Mullen was able to paper over some holes with Felipe Franks, but he wasn't winning national championships with Felipe Franks at quarterback. I think Lincoln Riley might be able to paper over some holes with Miller Moss, but he's not winning national championships. I think potentially, Brian Kelly and his staff there might be able to paper over some holes with Garrett Nussmeier. I don't think you're winning a national championship with Nussmeier at quarterback. I think Lagway is one of those guys where you look at it and go, he's a national championship caliber quarterback if he develops at all. And, I would not be surprised if Florida's offense is either elite or borderline elite this year. But I still go back to what I said about building edges. And so unless you bring something, so Napier's scheme isn't bad, but unless you bring something differentiated to the table, like why not delegate that to someone else? Right? Why not gain an edge someplace else? Because I think there are, the number of timeouts that are wasted because the play clock's running down, the number of goofy decisions that are made at the end of the half in terms of the way they want to actually move the ball up and down the field, all the ridiculous penalties that happen in terms of number of guys on the field, having to bring a mat with 10 spots for special teams on the road, those things. I mean, we laugh about them in some respects, but those are the things that lose you games. And there's not going to be, well, again, I don't know that it matters. That's the thing, Dave, is that if it doesn't work out this year, he's going to get 2026 to do it as well. And then we'll all be talking about the new offensive coordinator in 2026. So, hey, if you're Napier, you say, let me do it my way in 2025. And then in 2026, I'll bring somebody in if it doesn't work out. And it doesn't, I mean, we can sit here and disagree with it all we want. Doesn't really matter. It is the way it is, right? It's the same thing. I thought Florida needed to make some changes when it came to the staff. They didn't do it. I've come to accept that. I understand what it is. And I'm not necessarily expecting Florida's staff to look for all these little edges. Really, I mean, you and I were so frustrated during the season when DJ Lagway was playing every 3 drives. And, unfortunately, it required an injury. But if that injury hadn't happened to Mertz, what would we be saying right now?
Yeah.
Where would we be? Even if Florida had pulled off the 4 wins to end the year, what would we be hanging our hat on? What we're really hanging our hat on is a quarterback who played at an elite level, or at least between good and great, depending upon how you want to define it, in his first sniff at SEC football. And the 3 years or 2 years that are coming up after that, that's where we're hanging our hat. Again, it was pretty obvious when we were watching him on the field that Lagway was going to throw some interceptions, that Lagway was going to have some growing pains. But man, it was different when he was on the field. And honestly, that if somebody is going to be sort of hit or miss, having them play 1 out of every 3 drives is the worst way to implement them. Because, if you're only going to get 3 drives a game and you're inconsistent, it's entirely possible those 3 drives will produce nothing and give you, 3 punts. Whereas if you give the guy 9 drives, 3, 4, 5 of those drives end up in touchdowns because you're able to hit the big plays. And that's what we saw against Samford. That's what we saw against Kentucky. In some ways, that's what we saw against LSU and Ole Miss as well, to a lesser degree, but that Lagway would go through these spells where nothing was happening. And then all of a sudden, bam, Florida's going down the field. And sort of the way they facilitated the quarterbacks early in the year was something that, again, how do you give yourself an edge? Right. Yeah. What are you doing to give yourself the best chance to win? And, look, Billy Napier's got to win some games. That's what it comes down to. You can't go 4-8 and say it's a development year. You're going to actually have to win some games. So we'll see, man.
Yeah, I think the biggest worry for most out there is that it just turns out that he's holding this offense back with Lagway. That it just doesn't take that step. Like it's going to take a step with Lagway. To me, it is going to. In year 2, he's that good. The offense is going to take a step. Is there another step with an offensive coordinator change?
Well, I mean, so it's interesting. I did go back and look at the yards per play for all the playoff teams, and Clemson was 39 in offense, 54 in defense. That's kind of where Florida was this year. So against an ACC schedule, Florida might have a shot to win the ACC. Texas was 24th in offense, 2nd in defense. Tennessee was 55 on offense, 7th on defense. Ohio State was 4th on offense and 1st on defense. SMU 42nd and 9th. Penn State 8th and 6th. Indiana 35th and 3rd. Notre Dame 15th and 5th. Arizona State 30 and 37, Oregon 14 and 26, Boise State 10 and 56, and Georgia 50 and 30. So if you're talking about who advanced deep into the playoff, they were teams that had an elite unit on one side of the ball. Like Texas, 2nd on defense. Ohio State, 1st on defense. Penn State, 6th on defense. Notre Dame, 5th on defense. Now, certainly, look, Notre Dame supplemented with the 15th ranked offense. Penn State supplemented with the 8th ranked offense. Ohio State supplemented with the 4th ranked offense. And if you wonder why Ohio State beat Texas, Texas is at the 24th ranked offense. And I've been clamoring all year long for Texas to bring in Manning. I was basically looking at Ewers and going, this is like he's like he's a better version of Kelly Bryant. And you might have Trevor Lawrence sitting on the sideline, but you don't know until you play him. And Manning, when he was in there, was really, really good. And all season long, I was sitting there looking at it going, geez, if they just put Manning in, they might be able to win this thing, because it was the offense that was holding them back all year long. So my worry is I don't think Florida's going to have an elite defense next year. I think their defense will be good. I think their defense will be opportunistic. But I don't think Florida's going to have the 2nd-ranked defense in the country.
Nope.
And if my supposition from this one playoff is that especially in the SEC, you're going to have an elite unit on one side of the ball or the other, then the best chance for Florida to have that is on the offensive side of the ball. And so if Billy Napier, being the play caller, makes them the 12th ranked offense instead of the 2nd ranked offense, that's an edge that would have helped you. And there's going to come a time where you fall behind by a couple of touchdowns, or you have a turnover, or, just everything's going wrong. It's like the Madden game where the computer doesn't want you to win and just everything's going wrong. And the question is going to be, can you turn it around, and can you get it to can you pull out that game by a field goal late? Like you think about Washington a couple of years ago. Washington was something like 8-0 or 9-0 one-score games, and against inferior opponents. But Michael Penix was able to go pull those things out. And DeBoer this year, his luck ran out in those one-score games, and all of a sudden now Alabama, there's a lot of people wondering whether he's the right fit for that program. So again, I admire Billy Napier's chutzpah for essentially, I mean, the conversation was around the vote of confidence for Scott Strickland. The assumption was that there was an offensive coordinator. It sort of implied, and that sort of came along with the vote of confidence. But
I think that's why a lot of people were perturbed by this as well, is because it was talked about so much. And I kept saying, I'll believe it when I see it. Even though I was hearing there was a change possibly being made, I said on this podcast many a time, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, and again, I mean, look, you don't make $7 million a year and get to the position of being a head coach at a major SEC program without believing in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so,
and you deserve a chance to make it and see it work.
Okay.
No, but I'm saying we may have already reached that point.
Well, I mean, so yes, I think that there is. I have opinions on that, but I'm not. Again,
dance with what got you here.
My opinion. Well, what got him here? This offense didn't exactly work at Clemson before he had elite quarterbacks, right? Maybe that's the thing. Maybe he's just ruining the fact that he never got Taj Boyd or Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson, and he's like, I could have done that at Clemson if I'd have had that guy, and now he's got that guy. And look, maybe DJ Lagway wants him to call plays. I have no idea. Like, it turns out that, I mean, Lagway sort of.
I know there is something there with that. Yes, he does like it.
And there's a comfort level with that. But it's interesting. I think sometimes when your boss is like, sometimes when, like, you shouldn't always want to hear from your boss. Right? like if your boss is always nice to you, chances are he's not getting everything he can out of you. And so that's the question in the relationship that I have is just because Lagway's comfortable, like a lot of times growth comes from being uncomfortable. And so I would say that for both Napier and Lagway is that sometimes growth comes from being uncomfortable. An offensive coordinator in the room has an opportunity to make you a little bit uncomfortable, maybe think you outside the box, and quite honestly, maybe game plan for some of it. Was really interesting in that championship game, the throwback to Jeremiah Smith for the touchdown. I can't remember who it was on Twitter, but somebody basically posted Alabama doing that to Ohio State a couple years ago. And it's like, oh, Chip Kelly learned. Chip Kelly looked at the film, found something during the offseason, and kind of held on to it until a time when he thought he needed it and had time to do the install and all that sort of stuff, right? But you're talking about their wide receivers being wide open. Nobody was more open than Jeremiah Smith on that one. And I mean, if you're Notre Dame, I mean, doesn't your defensive game plan start and stop with make sure we've got two guys on Jeremiah Smith? And the motion and the scheme and all that stuff just got him wide open. And again, to your point, I'm not sure we necessarily see that all the time. But I mean, it is what it is, man. We can sit here and we can talk about it, and we can complain about it, and we can say we should do something else. But one, we're not gonna be able to prove a negative, right? If Florida's offense ends up top 10 in the country, we're not gonna be able to say, well, it would have been 3 with an offensive coordinator. Like you're just not gonna be able to do that. Now, if Florida's offense ends up 45th, one, we got problems, but two, now you're right in the Napier zone. I mean, he's been right between 45th and 55th in yards per play every year he's been here, whether it was with an explosive player like Anthony Richardson, whether it was with a game manager maybe like Graham Mertz, or whether it was an explosive player in DJ Lagway for half the year last year. They were much higher in the yards per play with Lagway in there than they were with Mertz or with Warner. At the same time, if he ends up in that sort of Napier zone between 45th and 55th, we're on the outside looking in. I mean, I don't think it's a bad team, but I don't think it's a team we're going to write home about and say, remember when Florida broke through. And that's the question, right? The question with the offensive coordinator for me is not, can Florida beat its over under? The question with the offensive coordinator for me is, do you have a chance at a national championship? And do you give yourself a better chance if you bring somebody in? I think most people agree that you do, but Napier doesn't, and he's the only one who matters.
Yep. So, I mean, most of this has already been said, in when the OC talk came up last year. But now the quarterback is different, and we'll see if that changes what we think and expect can happen. But there we go.